When you start thinking about changes that you want to make in the new year, what do they look like? I'm talking about things more than just going back to the gym. 2023 is inviting us to think about what is important to us and what boundaries we're going to put in place to keep ourselves healthy and well balanced. Part of those boundaries, for some of us, are directly related to healthcare. Far too many of us walk in a doctor's office and feel like a number, unseen and unheard. Where we go in search of answers isn't working because the intricate mosaic of the energetic, physical, and emotional body that is you is being lost in our current model. I am so excited to share with you the conversation that I had with Taylor Sappington of Tailored Wellbeing. Taylor is a brilliant practitioner, and it was my honor to have her on this show. Taylor and I have firsthand experience with not only the boundary setting, but also how the current medical model can leave us feel unsupported. Let's shift the narrative around our health as we walk into 2023. What are we willing to accept? Where are we going to turn for the answers that we seek? Stay with us. You won't want to miss all the juiciness of this episode. Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I am an Eastern medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your menstrual health, offering period solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are. I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. So I am so excited for today's guest. She is just an amazing person, an amazing practitioner. I would love to welcome to the show Taylor Sappington of Tailored Wellbeing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a conversation long overdue, my friend.
I am so excited to be here. Guys, we had like a warm up to the actual meeting. So we've been talking for an hour almost. But we're here now. We're here, and I'm so excited to be here. And I feel very lucky to know you, like kindred spirit.
Oh, the feeling is absolutely mutual. That is for sure. If you haven't caught some of our previous conversations, you'll want to check out Taylor's podcast, Tailored Talks. We've had a couple of very lively conversations about different parts of the system, how we work in the system, how we work outside of the system. And speaking of the system, this is a really great, yeah, we are.
Yeah.
We're coming to you today talking about how ego affects care.
Can we all just drink that one in for a minute? Because I imagine there are many people in your listening audience that know exactly what we're talking about. Just being on the receiving end of practitioner, healthcare provider that is so out of touch with who they are and so in touch with the power that they have assumed in the position or the role that they now play.
Yes, and often to the point where the person on the other side of that desk or in the other side of that conversation really feels like a number, and they don't feel seen and they don't feel heard.
You know, it's interesting because we have an entire medical industrial complex, that's what we'll call it, right? But we have an entire system that has been built off of metrics, which means just like in, say, the college setting, in many of these university settings, you're a number. I don't know if anybody, you yourself, like, did you attend a college where like you were one of 500 in a lecture hall? And was that like an effective way for you to learn? I don't know about you, but I was like, I'm drowning and I need a life raft and I need one-on-one personalized attention. And I need you to walk me through this concept because I just learn differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that same principle then applied to the healthcare system where you're just a number? You're a butt on a bed in a room for 5 minutes to check a few boxes as someone types away and stares at their screen to move on.
Yeah. And when you go into that office, either looking for answers because you've been to several practitioners leading up to this point and still
Mhm.
have none, or you're there because you've had some heartbreaking thing happen in your life. As I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about many women who've come into
Mhm.
my practice who are like, the doctor didn't even acknowledge that I was there because I lost my baby. And there wasn't even that level of compassion and
Right.
actually seeing the person on the other side of this conversation and saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for your loss."
Do you think that they're capable? Like, do you think that there is an awareness? And I don't mean that in the sense that, like, obviously, a lot of these healthcare providers, all of them, not a lot of them, they're human,
Mhm.
right? But do you think that there has been a degree of trauma that these healthcare providers that, have been subjected to that literally changes the way with which they perceive their patient's experience?
I think that that is the case for some.
Mhm.
I think for some, they go into these professions very well intentioned and wanting to
Mhm.
save the world and take care of people and make a difference.
Right.
And the model doesn't
Yeah.
allow for them to
Mhm.
really have the full experience of why they wanted to go into medicine in the first place. But I do think that trauma is a factor also,
Mhm.
because when you're dealing with a lot of heartbreaking things day in and day out, the human coping mechanism is to insulate yourself. And
Right.
whether that's distancing yourself from the people that you're dealing with, or you kind of float through what it is that you're doing so that you're muting your emotional
Mhm.
response to what it
Mhm.
is that you're dealing with. There are a variety of coping mechanisms
Mhm.
that I could see being used in little t and big T trauma situations.
Right. I mean more so too, like I think that's really valid and accurate and observable, but I mean more so in like the training too. There
Mhm.
is like this dehumanization in the training and the upbringing of a lot of these medical professionals. And like you said, I do think a lot of them move into the space of wanting to become healthcare providers from a well-intended, point of origin. But I also think there are the people that just want the power. They were the kid that was made fun of in school, and they have this big cerebral brain that's really capable. And what a better place and space to utilize that than in the healthcare setting field, because it's just going to support obviously the distance that's created between practitioner and patient, because there's this complex that's applied in the healthcare setting where the patient is inferior to the superior provider that
Mhm.
is giving them care, which the whole idea of the care applied in the medical model is something that's wildly skewed, in my opinion, too. I don't know if there is actually any care provided, or if a lot of what we see is triage, inappropriate situations.
I couldn't have worded that better.
Mhm.
Honestly, the whole idea of it being triage, because from the moment the practitioner walks through the door, they have 15 minutes with you. And that's exactly what happens. They're trying to figure out your list of symptoms, what's risky, what's not, essentially, also because they have to worry about massive malpractice and all of that
Yeah.
type of stuff. They're essentially also covering their own butt from a
Always.
legal perspective and making sure that they have successfully checked all of the "could I get sued for missing this" type boxes, which is a
Mhm.
form of triage.
100%.
And so I thought you made a really interesting point too about the trauma in the training.
Mhm.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but the moment you said it, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I would absolutely agree with that," because, I've seen just in the work that I do, you have people, females,
Yeah.
you have female OBGYNs who sound like a mouthpiece of a patriarchal system, meaning
Oh,
they are
God.
regurgitating what
Mhm.
it was that they've been taught.
Yep.
And this is the mouthpiece, this is the lens with which they have been taught, and so they are recycling what they know
Mhm. Which is so
from
sad to me. Like,
It is. Well, I mean, the
Mhm.
military does something kind of similar too, in the fact that you are supposed to be a good representation of the military organization that you are a member of. There's certain level of expectation in how you talk, how you dress, how you
Excellence.
walk.
They call it, quote, excellence.
Exactly. But the medical model has the same thing. Your
Mhm.
training creates a certain way that you think and you move through the world.
Yeah, and it doesn't actually encourage critical thinking. And I don't know if anyone's paid attention to the last 2 years. How can you not pay attention? But the grossest pieces of neglect that we've seen in the medical industrial complex, particularly in the last few years, or at least that's how I feel, it's been illuminated, no less, is the lack of critical thinking that's actually present in the current healthcare model or the paradigm that we're seeing being applied to patient care. And critical thinking is what allows for practitioners to actually apply individual like plans of care. And when you're given a uniform plan of care that's based on the symptoms that they're trying to triage in 15 minutes, actual medicine isn't practiced.
Mhm.
It's like it's not practiced, right? And then you have these repeat patients. I don't know. We saw this a lot in the hospital. They were called repeat offenders, right? But every time they came in, they had like a 30-day window where they could not be seen again. And if they came back in within that 30 days, they had to recode the patient so that the actual hospital wasn't penalized through the various insurance companies because the hospital would either be deducted pay or they would have to offer pay back to the actual insurance company, right? But like, the lack of actual medicine and care that's applied in the healthcare system, I think, is in part directly associated with the lack of art in medicine these days. I mean, that's one of the things that I love about working with you in these Eastern philosophies is there's art, and art doesn't actually allow for ego to infuse the
Mhm.
practice, right? But there's lack of art in the application, and there's lack of consideration of individual factors.
Mhm. Well, and the emotional and spiritual body are completely left out of the
Oh
equation.
my God.
So, like, the way that we pull bodies apart in
Mhm.
order to triage them, in
It's
order to
reductionistic.
it so is, and
Mhm,
everybody is in a silo.
mhm.
So, it's hard to get a coordination of care. It's hard to you've got one doctor that deals with your reproductive system. You've got one specialist that will teach you how to breastfeed your baby. You have another person that's going to tell you about why you're tired all the time. But, that doctor could be an ENT, it could be an endocrinologist. Like, you could be sent in like one of four different directions if you feel
Mhm.
tired and it doesn't feel normal. So, and none of those offices talk. Because
No.
you sign the paper and your records are supposed to transfer, often you get there before the records do, and then you have an empty 15 minutes where the person goes, "Huh, we're gonna stare at each other because I don't have your records yet to know your history."
It's so interesting too, because as you're saying this, I'm like sitting here thinking to myself, at what point in history did humans become so disconnected that they forgot what it actually means to be a human being? If we
Mhm,
allow, it's kind of like letting Mother Nature do her thing. Like, if we stopped trying to interrupt, because we are an interruption, okay? And human ingenuity is a beautiful thing. And no parts of this conversation are meant to sidestep the beauty of human ingenuity, right? We probably wouldn't be driving cars without it
mhm.
or flying airplanes. That's debatable depending on who you talk to, right? Like, but there are a variety of luxuries, we'll call them, that come from human ingenuity. But there's also a lot of destruction that comes from human ingenuity because we seem to think that we know better than Mother Nature without the
Mhm.
pure recognition that she's been around for thousands of years and is in no need of us actually staying here to continue to thrive. I think arguably, if we were to be removed, she would be like, damn, I can take a big deep breath and actually hit a reset on my system. And I don't think it's any different when it comes to our ecosystem.
Yeah.
There are so many interventions, that's what we call them, but a lot of these interventions are just interruptions. And these interruptions are rooted in somebody coming from a place rooted in ego who thinks that they know better than the body. And I don't know about you, but I am not seeing a positive trend when it
Mhm.
comes to the data set associated with the way that medical care, and I say that in quotations, has been applied in the modern centuries.
I agree completely with that because I just think about the people that I work with that have
Mhm.
medications to deal with side effects of medications. And it ends up becoming this jigsaw puzzle of, oh, well, this is a negative side effect of this thing that you're on. So let me give you this other thing to cancel that out. But this thing that's supposed to cancel this one symptom out actually has created three others. So let me give you something else. And it's all cerebral,
Mhm.
right? And we're talking about like symptoms where the body is essentially communicating with you saying, hi, this isn't working for me.
Mhm.
And the ego in that equation is, oh, well, I am smarter than what the body is telling me. And I have something else that I'm going to try to cover, band aid, blanket that
Mhm.
symptom with instead of looking at it as, oh, Houston, we have a problem.
Right. Well, and if we all got real with ourselves, including the physicians that are applying this care, the Band-Aid and the blanket is a business plan. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality of it is, I think if most healthcare providers really sat with themselves, right? Because one of the draws, at least it was back in the day, I don't know about these days, but one of the draws of becoming a doctor is the money that you make. Now, that's not to say that there's not massive debt that goes along with it as well, too, but there's affluence associated with it. There's stature associated with it, and there's guaranteed income associated with it. And when we really start to talk about the band-aids and the blankets, we have to have an honest conversation as to what would actually happen if we remove the band-aids and we remove the blankets and we went to the root. The reality of that conversation is we would have a happier, healthier populace that didn't actually need the doctor. And that doesn't mean that heroic measures are not going to be needed. Car accidents happen. Bones get broken, right? Heart attacks happen. And I tell clients, I'm sure you do too, all the time, look, if you're having a heart attack, go to the nearest ER. What I have to offer is not going to help you. Now, the recovery period, little bit different. But no less, I think heroic measures is really where medicine shines. And
Mm-hmm.
outside of that, we've just created a beautiful business to fuel the gas tank of industries like the pharmaceutical companies.
Mm-hmm. Last time I looked at the statistics,
Mhm.
we spend 19% of our gross domestic product on acute
It's
care.
billions.
It's ridiculous.
It's billions.
We spend less than 4% on preventative care. Like,
I Are we all listening to this? I think Adrian and I are a little speechless at the moment. But I think the propensity of that statement when you actually understand what it means, and I think part of the plan of this beautiful business that funds all of these quote interventions is that we disconnect people to the point that they don't understand, right?
mhm,
Oh, well, like cancer, really hot topic. By no means am I an expert on it. But like, what is cancer at a cellular level? Most people can't answer that question, right? It's just a proliferation. It's the poor utilization of stem cells. We keep stem cells in crypts in our gut, right? And when the
mhm,
ecosystem becomes diseased, we can't properly utilize the medicine that's been built into us. So now there's a business that's been built off of addressing the poorly managed ecosystem. And the ecosystem is mismanaged because we've encouraged people to disconnect from their bodies.
mhm.
This somehow started with ego, but here we are. This is how Adrian and I roll, when it comes to conversation.
Well, but it totally ties back in because ego disconnects us
Yes.
from the care,
Yep.
from ourselves,
Yep.
because we also WebMD the shit out of everything,
Google
right?
is always going to tell you you're dying, you have an extra extremity you don't need, or it's going to give you a list of interventions that are completely unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. And, I'm not having this conversation from a place of let's demonize the allopathic
No.
model because
Hmm.
that's not it. What it
Right.
is an illumination of where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are.
Yes.
And when I see people walk into my practice and go, I had a stillbirth at 21 weeks, and the practitioner didn't make eye contact with me and didn't even acknowledge that I was there because of a loss.
Hmm.
Or I have the person that has had 7 miscarriages walk into their doctor's office and go, why does this keep happening to me? And the reproductive endocrinologist laughs and goes, there's nothing wrong with your test results or your husband's test results, but we can do IVF with ICSI, and then walks out the door equally as fast. So that person whose head is now spinning because they expected to get an answer from an expert because we're in a model where we're indoctrinated into this
Hmm.
idea that the doctors hold the answers.
Hmm.
And it isn't until that moment where we come face to face with their ego. In
Hmm.
the instance of the reproductive endocrinologist that I used in my analogy, it's their ego saying, oh, well, but I can fix this with ICSI. When the woman goes, but I've been getting pregnant, how does that fix staying pregnant? And he doesn't
Right.
stick around for the conversation.
I know this is going
So
to sound real sexist too. I mean, so be it. Here we are. Having a man tell me what's going on with my body, big fuck that. Sorry, guys. Like, I'm like, okay. I don't understand all your parts the way you understand them because I don't live with a set of testicles and a penis. Okay. So, like, respectfully, I only have a certain cerebral
mhm.
understanding of how they work, right? So I get so lit up. And this happens with women too. So don't get me wrong. Like women, I almost think at times the female practitioners are worse and the ego
Mhm.
is bigger and there's more violence in the way they communicate than with the males. But I have a really hard time wrapping my head around your example where the endo, the specialist is, or the fertility specialist, right? Reproductive specialist is a male not listening to the female who's supposed to be carrying the fetus, no less. I'm going to do this. We're going to do this. Bye. And it's like,
Mhm.
and your cerebral understanding is glowing right now because you're not even willing to have a human conversation with me.
Right. And by the time you get escalated, okay,
Mm-hmm.
because like this is a business,
Mm-hmm.
and you get kicked up the tiers,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if you are struggling with fertility, because this is an area I work in all the time. And
Right.
I see it with women all the time who
Right.
come into my practice and go, so I was trying for 6 months. I got put into this infertility program. I've gotten this diagnosis of unexplained infertility. I've,
What even is that?
right? Thank you. Because from my perspective,
It's
when
all explainable when you start to peel things apart. What is that?
right? I do not accept that as a diagnosis. I don't.
Mm-mm.
And yet I've seen it all over, and I'm going to use myself as an example. I've seen it all over my chart. And
Mm-hmm.
it is what drove me to become the fertility person that I am now.
Right.
Because I was always the why kid growing up, and I refused to accept that there was no why
Right.
for why I was having problems, why
There's
I was
always a why.
there's always a why. And that's the wisdom that I found in Eastern medicine,
Mm-hmm.
minus the ego. It was
Well, I was going to
just
say they don't carry ego. Do you know where Eastern medicine picks up its ego? In America. Sorry, guys, but we have practitioners all over the United States that are practicing modalities that they've only gained experience with and from textbooks. Okay. And then they're applying this in practice. And there's this American culture being infused with these Eastern practices, and it's not meshing well because now we have these beautiful practices that can be so serving to bodies, across the board that are infused with ego. And that just it dilutes the beauty of it.
Mhm. If we truly are able to step out of that ego space and get into the essence
Yes.
of the problem,
Yes.
no pun intended for any Eastern practitioners that know
Right.
that I'm talking
Yeah.
about Jing, which is
Yeah.
your essence, right? But like, it's a powerful question to ask
Mhm.
and thought provoking in terms of what could it look like?
Mhm.
Because my heart breaks every time I have somebody sit across the table from me
Mhm.
explaining all the ways they tried to get help from a practitioner who didn't see them, who didn't hear them,
Mhm.
and sent them out of the room with something that oftentimes didn't even apply to the reason they came in.
Mhm.
Because there were certain blanket assumptions made, certain standard operating procedures that were followed, which is all part of that triaging process, and then
Yep.
out the door they went. And every time you have to go back in that door, you are charged a lot of money. Your insurance company may or may not accept it. So you also have a
Mhm.
pencil pushing person behind a desk making
Right.
decisions about whether you can have further interventions because, that also further proliferates this idea that you are a number.
Right.
Like, I will never ever forget, like, our plan was supposed to cover 3 infertility treatments. Cool. I had 2 mishandled IUIs. And so but I didn't know that at the time.
Right.
Now knowing what I know, I realized they missed the mark entirely.
Mhm.
No follicular scan, nothing. There was an IUI. It was very difficult to have this all done
Mhm.
for logistical reasons, et cetera, et cetera. And then to find out that the person who pushes the paper behind the desk was saying, oh, this was like 3 treatments total for the whole life of the plan, not plan year. So if I were to embark on IVF, I had 1 shot and that was
Which
it.
we know it doesn't work out like that most of the time.
And that is ego not
Mhm.
looking at the human condition
Mhm.
and the
Do you ever
disconnect.
think too, like not to bring this to like a too esoteric place, but here we go. Do you ever think too that some of the attempts with these different modalities, like IVF, for example, the body rejects it? Because it's like, this is not the way that it's meant to be, and I'm not ready, or I don't feel safe enough, or I don't think I have the resources I need in order to carry this to term and make it a good experience for me and the soul coming to me.
Oh, that is such a great question. I truly believe, as an Eastern medicine practitioner, that there is a heavenly mandate that is fulfilled
Hmm. Yep.
and that it is heaven and earth coming together to create humanity.
Yep.
And
I think
that is,
everybody should just chew on that for a minute. Heaven and earth coming together to create humanity. I think not only should everybody chew on that, they should chew on it and then they should look around and start going, what is going on?
I agree,
Hmm.
because people put tens of thousands of dollars into the IVF process.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of guidance in terms of supporting mom's body. There's not a
Hmm.
lot of education about what these additional levels of hormones are going to do to the body
Or the baby for that matter.
or the baby. Yep.
Hmm.
What do birth outcomes look like for people who have had IVF? Are there heightened levels of risks during the pregnancy, during the birth? Like,
Have
we
you
don't.
seen this? Like, because I have in practice with women who have gone through this process and then they come out on the other end and it's like, what's up? What's down? What's right? What's left? And what goes where?
Yes, I
Hmm.
have. And I support people through assistive reproductive technology intervention, and
Right.
their outcomes are better.
Well, of course, because you're combining the two, and I think we're missing the mark. There can be a beautiful marriage of Eastern and Western,
Hmm.
and that beautiful marriage can create a lot of positive change. But when we only rely on one system and we mock another, change isn't going to happen, not seamlessly, and people are not going to get the support that they need. And that's part of the egoic problem, too. Why is what you and I do quackery?
Oh, I wish I had an answer to that because I challenge that
Hmm.
question every single day. Because in my mind,
Hmm.
it's an aspect that has to be there because your medical intervention that you're getting from the allopathic model is not going to work or work as well or have complications if your emotional and spiritual body are not on board.
I mean, we are a living example of that as a country. Hello.
Mhm. We
We're
are
embodying that.
we're not a sum of parts.
No.
We are an intricate, interconnected, sovereign being that if we
Right.
feel like the intervention is against our will, okay? And
Hmm.
I'm saying that not in that you're having something forced upon you, but sometimes you feel like you're in a position where
The only thing you can do.
correct,
Hmm.
which does force that internal intuitive gut feeling that your power is being taken from you or your voice is being taken from you. And when that happens, you are not fully invested in the process. It's
100%.
it's why when I work with people, I say, here's all of the information. I would love to support you, but I am not a high pressure saleswoman
Nope.
because this practice is not going to serve your highest and best good if you are not fully in all of those facets, spiritually, emotionally, and physically invested in this process.
Hmm.
You will see the needle change some, but you have to believe it, believe in it,
Hmm.
feel in the core gut of your body that this is going to serve your highest and best good. And when you believe that in the fabric of your being, you're going to have a very different outcome.
A
It's the
hundred
same thing with
percent.
people who have surgical intervention.
Hmm.
Like, if they go into it truly believing that this is what I have to do right now, their outcome will be better
Yep.
than if
The
they
body
go
is
into it.
resilient.
It is. And
Hmm.
it's brilliant. It knows what it needs to do. It
Hmm.
has disharmonies because we put them there.
100%. That interruption.
Totally.
Hmm.
Totally. We interrupt it from an ego space.
Yep.
So again, it all comes back to ego. When
Well,
we
we're so obsessed with
Mhm.
having to quantify everything. And
Yes.
it's so beautiful to me to watch these modalities that have been around for thousands of years, no less. Like
Mhm.
the medicine that we practice here in the United States, it's only been around for, what is it, 200 years? Maybe?
Yeah, it's a baby.
Maybe?
It's a
Yeah.
baby in
Okay.
the grand scheme of things.
Right? So we look at that and then we look at these modalities that have been around for thousands of years. And I'm like, did they need studies to do any of this? Did they have to have a randomized controlled clinical trial to believe that the application of like, Panchakarma and Ayurveda was going to be effective? Or did they just apply and then apply again and tweak if need be and apply again? And eventually they had a beautiful recipe that just worked. And you know how they knew it worked? They watched it. They watched
Mhm.
people respond to it. They watched bodies respond to it. They took biofeedback, which, in my opinion, is the best data
Mhm.
we could possibly ask for. There is no way that we are ever going to be able to quantify the dynamics of everyday living in a controlled setting. We
Mhm.
can't do it. So even the data that we do have, right? And I suppose there's an argument for need for data in some spaces. I have a tendency to be like, yeah, if the patient's body or the client's body is telling me that it's a go, I don't need a paper to tell me it's not a go. I don't even know where that thought was going, but like it's so interesting to me to just watch our obsession with quantification through a controlled study that can't capture what it actually means to be a human being. And that is ego too.
100%. That was something that I came up hard against. I'm still thinking about your why is what we do quack.
Oh, God, yeah,
You
that
know,
could be a whole
it
podcast.
could totally be, and maybe we should do that. But I was thinking a lot about what you were saying in that vein. And when I first came into peri-steam hydrotherapy, there was a lot of challenging
Yeah.
against its safety. Why should you do it? You know, like all of that kind of, it changes your pH, like all of that garbage that's out there. And because it was picked up by some very large media outlets,
Mm-hmm.
people are like, oh, this is doctors saying this is bad, so it must be bad. And I would get clients who would say, well, I found this on the internet. I can't find any studies on it. Like, why should I try this? Right. Well, okay, some of it is the fact that there are studies, but in other countries. And we have, again, ego, right? If it's
Mm-hmm.
not done here in the United States,
It's not good enough.
correct. Instead of
Honestly, I would argue other countries are better at performing
100%.
studies.
Yep,
Yeah.
100%. And I would agree with that. And like some of the studies that I would share with people, because Korean PubMed has some very beautiful literature on this.
Mm-hmm.
They also have more of an integrative way of
Yeah.
using some of the modality that I use with allopathic medicine for better outcomes. There was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of literature that came out about this integrative approach using allopathic model and Eastern medicine. I mean, even as recently as looking at treating people who had had long COVID, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So there is so much wisdom in the ancient art. And there, you know, I used to tell people when they were like, well, there's no data on there about it. And I'm like, well, but it's a 7,000-year-old technology. That's a lot of vaginas. My money's on that.
No joke.
And
No joke.
people would look at me like, what?
And I think there's this attempt to erase things too.
Mhm.
Like we're just like, if it doesn't fit into our box, we're just gonna erase the idea that it exists. And like we were just saying, the information you're looking for is available in other countries. You just have to know what to look for. Oh, and how to find it because most of our browsers are not built to allow us full visibility of what's available for us to actually make an informed decision.
And I think that's the hardest part is ego and informed decision walk hand in hand. Because if people are trying to find that information and they can't, or what comes up in the first 5 hits of a search engine is all negative, 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 negative,
Uh-huh.
because of the number of clicks of that particular engine,
Yep.
but not even looking at, you know, I think anecdotal and experiential information is invaluable
I agree. It's potent.
because if it's working, it's working. Like
And
this
you
isn't
usually see it across multiple different people. So, like different ages, different ethnicities, different points in their life,
Mhm.
different socioeconomic influence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, if you're getting positive outcomes,
Hmm.
but then you've got an ego voice of the
Hmm.
patriarchal system, even if it's coming out of a female mouthpiece,
Yep.
naysaying.
Hmm.
Right. When I started putting together a training program for peri-steam hydrotherapy, I've been working on my own course. And one of the aspects of it is to look at some of those voices, to be able to critically think
Right.
about the motivations behind it, why they would say it. And the theme that runs through everything that I have found so far is
Hmm.
anyone who says anything from that space has never sat down with somebody that has training
Hmm.
to explain it to them.
Well,
Why
that
would
would
this work?
require them to detach from their cognitive dissonance, right? And
Right.
God forbid we let go of the cognitive dissonance. I don't know about you, but for me, like if you had met me 10 years ago, I had cognitive dissonance, right? Like I had to become chronically ill so that I could personally understand what it meant to be impacted by these modalities, right? So it usually takes some sort of traumatic event for us to get
Mhm.
to this place in space, sadly. But the larger body of medicine has this fear
Mhm.
of being really seen.
Mhm.
And if they're really seen, that means that we get to poke holes in their approach. And God forbid we poke holes in their approach, because that creates room for other types of support. But
Mhm.
in reality, they're poking their own holes by refusing to acknowledge that there are other modalities that could be equally, if not more so, supportive in conjunction or in lieu of what they're offering. It's supposed to be about the patient.
Yes, it is. It's supposed to be about the person coming in for whatever the service or support that they're seeking.
And it's
And
not
it's
anymore.
not. It's not. And there's such a disconnect. Sometimes there isn't even eye contact made in the appointment. Like that's how deep that disconnect lies.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that work with me, even the ones that still are very much a subscriber of getting allopathic support, are starting to notice these areas of disconnect and
Mm-hmm.
feeling less and less of a connection. Like I get asked quite often, can you make a referral for a doctor, because they know that they need a doctor for some reason. So let's say that they are potentially a high risk pregnancy. They know that they are going to need a doctor. So high risk pregnancy, 3% of pregnancies, just going to put that out
Right.
there. Okay. We do not need to have cesareans for 97% of the population. That's a topic for another day. But if
That makes
somebody
me
is,
rage in my chest space. So,
well, oof, man. So, let's say you've got somebody that's a high risk pregnancy, they'll come to me and they'll go, can you make a recommendation for
mm-hmm.
an OBGYN? Because they know that they need one for the safety
Mm-hmm.
of them and their baby that is like-minded like me.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle sometimes to make that connection for people because of the way that the system is working. And
Oh,
I have tried to educate
mm-hmm.
OBGYNs about what I do, how I do it, how it can be a support in
Mm-hmm.
what they do, and that it really comes with very minimal, if any, risk at all.
You can take the ego out of the doctor, but you can't take the doctor out of the ego, if that makes sense, or vice versa. So, like, even the doctors, and I commend them for moving away from the space because they're recognizing that the practice that they're engaging in isn't really serving humanity or the greater collective. But like, it's even difficult to find those doctors finding their footing outside of the space, because there's still that indoctrination and that,
Mhm.
ingrained knowing of, I'm a doctor and I know best.
And that goes back to the model that they go
Mm-hmm.
through, that trauma of their
Mm-hmm.
training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's equally as gross, guys, to observe that outside of the conventional paradigm too. I almost think it's more offensive because you're like, I actually thought you were different.
Mhm.
And maybe I'm not giving you enough credit. And maybe you are different, but I'm not recognizing that difference in your behavior. I actually thought you were different.
And it's heartbreaking when you get to that space,
Yeah,
because when
it's
people,
another trauma.
it's another medical system associated trauma
Mm-hmm.
that comes out of ego.
Yep.
And I can't tell you the number of women who they start their conversations with me all from a place of, I went seeking help. I wasn't seen. I wasn't heard. I'm here. I have no idea if you can help me,
Right.
but I'm willing to try because
Right.
what I've been trying isn't working. It is literally the definition of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
keep trying the same things over and over again, expecting different results, and you don't get them.
Mm-hmm. A different doctor applying the same thing. Ego thinks that they're actually going to execute differently when in reality, the technology is not different.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, like you're saying, we have a person that's subjected to the same therapy with a different person applying. And because the person cannot disconnect from their ego and say, you should probably try something different, or we should look at another route.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, let's do this again. Different circus, same monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Ugh, it just breaks my heart because it stands as a roadblock in terms of anyone moving forward.
Well, then you have to earn trust. And by no means am I averse to earning trust, but sometimes the gauntlet that you're put through as the quote alternative, I find that so disrespectful, by the way. It's the original medicine. I'm not an alternative practitioner. I practice modalities that have been around for thousands of years and are the original medicine. I digress, right? But then we're put in a position of earning trust that we didn't lose.
Mhm. 100%. When I first started this work, I
Mhm.
felt like I had to run 1,000 miles an hour at
Yep.
every, like, training, certification, further education, anything that was gonna put a piece of paper on my friggin' wall,
Yep.
and I hate to say that, but I was feeling
I did the
pressure.
same thing. I get
Yeah.
it.
You
Mhm.
you feel pressured by the system and the fact that the narrative questions
Mhm.
your competency, your understanding, your ability, and all of these things if you do not have MD after your name.
The reality of it is, though, and you know this because we've talked about this, but it bears worth repeating. We are usually more competent in broader strokes because we are not so attached to one system and the way that it functions. Everything matters
Mhm, absolutely.
and nothing works in isolation. And I don't understand why that's such a foreign concept to so many people, too.
Well, that's how medicine was originally taught.
Yes.
You apprenticed, you
Hmm.
learned with somebody. There was an experiential piece like you were talking about earlier. Like, this kind of wisdom was passed down generationally, like nothing like it is now.
Hmm.
Like, you were taught how to read the body, look at the body. Like, I love tongue diagnosis because you're looking at what's right in front of you right then.
Yes, it's so interesting. When I worked in the clinical setting, I was in all, like primary care, the hospital, long and short term care, palliative care. My favorite physicians to spend time with were the ones that were trained in India because
Mhm.
they totally approached their patients different and you could see it. Everything was like, what can I visualize? Is there a palpation technique I can utilize? What can I garner from their tongue? The color of their skin, the color of their eyes, the pupil, right? Like what their fingernails look like. They could literally use biofeedback and the canvas that is the body to
Mhm.
put a picture together. And then they would make their comments about a diagnosis and they would use the technology of the United States to confirm. And it like astounded people. And I'm like, this is what it means to be trained in the fluency of the body and its feedback.
Mhm. That is such a beautiful example. I do something kind of similar also
Yeah.
because I look at the body. One of my clients jokingly calls me the period whisperer because just
Yeah.
from blood color, presentation, PMS symptoms, all of that stuff, I can tell you what's going on in your system.
Right.
And then I will tell them to talk to their doctor about these tests, or I'll talk to their doctor about this, or somebody wants to see if their cyst is shrinking or disappeared, or they want to see what's happening with their fibroid. And then I will encourage them, sure, go have a scan done,
Right.
go get the tangible data.
Hmm.
And with very few exceptions, because obviously there's a level of compliance and
Of
participation
course.
on the part
Client's
of the
part. Hmm.
person, right? But you'll see a change.
Yeah.
And then they're like, "Oh, my Western allopathic test just confirmed that this quackery thing is actually freaking working. Holy cow." Right?
Yeah.
And I love when that happens. I
Hmm.
invite people to do that because
Hmm.
I have an unwavering faith in
Of
what I
course.
practice, and I know they're going to see the change that they want to see.
Testament is the testimonial,
Mhm,
right? Like when you're a living testament, you become a testimonial, and that's for everyone. And that's kind of how this has to work, and that's how it continues to work. But there's beauty in that too, because it's not quantification, it's a lived experience. And what's more potent than embodying a lived experience? Try
mhm.
to convince somebody who's actually experienced something that it doesn't work. Best of luck. you're not
Mhm.
going to change their mind. They're going to be like, oh, no, no, I did this. I saw a difference. I got better. Things improved. I have tools for a lifetime. It works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tools for a
Mhm.
lifetime are huge because you're putting somebody in the driver's seat of their health. And
Right.
that is immense amount of power because part of how this model steals our power is they don't teach us. So we don't know what we don't know.
hmm It's like you and I have talked about, like the female menstrual cycle. How many women don't know what length? Like, hey, Adrian, what's the length of your cycle? 4 days. Okay, not what I meant, but thank you. That was great. I need to know that too. So that answers my next question. But like, first day of bleed to next first day of bleed. Like, we don't teach our
Mhm.
girls this, right? Or we teach them that hormonal contraception is the only way to prevent pregnancy, when in reality, that's not the only way to prevent pregnancy. We can educate our daughters and then allow them to make the decision as to what feels best for them. Like, we can encourage exploration, you
Mhm.
know?
And I think back even as my journey in this experience as a
hmm
practitioner, at the very beginning, I did not realize just how entrenched and indoctrinated I was, not even having
Yes.
gone through allopathic medical training.
Yep.
I still had this understanding and belief that pieces of paper on my wall validated what I knew. Letters after my name validated what I do,
hmm
and that I, okay, so again, all ego, I
hmm
was a brilliant practitioner that could solve these problems for people. And then I realized and had one of those like moments where I'm like, hold on a second, this is not I. That
hmm
is ego. I am not the one doing this. I am the educator. I am the cheerleader.
Sister speaks.
I am the coach. I am the confidant. Because
Yes.
sometimes we talk 1% about what's going
Mhm.
on in the body, and the rest of the 99.9% about the fact that they're going through a divorce or they had a loss in their family or
Their kids breaking out in hives for 3 straight months, like
the grief around their miscarriage anniversary is coming
Mhm.
up. And then they go, and my period was terrible this month. And I go, but honey,
Of
there's a
course.
connection. Of course, your body's going to show up this
Um,
way because there are these other things going on. And so I've had people apologize to me in appointments and go, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, that's all I talked about the whole time. And I'm like, but that's what needed to happen in this space because you
Right.
needed a place to park that in
Mhm.
order for your body to show up for you.
Mhm.
Because emotions are energy in our system, they disrupt normal function if we deny them. It's called liver chi stagnation. When we
Mhm.
try to suppress the fact
Mhm.
that we're in extreme grief or we're angry about something or whatever, if we're just trying to put on a stiff upper lip and like look like we don't have anything going
That's
on,
American culture.
that is American culture, is Western culture at large.
Mhm.
And the thing is this is why we have high rates of heart attacks and other types of
And
things that
cancer.
happen because we suppress this stuff. When I
Mhm.
see women with fibroids, when I see women with history of cancer, there is very often the theme of a suppressed voice somewhere in their narrative.
Mhm.
And it's heartbreaking because the body gets that disruption
Mhm.
from its normal brilliance,
Mhm.
and it either doesn't have the energy to show up in the way that it needs to, or there's something blocking it as it's trying to show up the way that it needs to. And if we can just take that out of the way, and sometimes that's just creating a space for emotions to exist.
Yes. That's one of our superpowers. We are sentient. We have the ability to emote, and we avoid one of our superpowers.
Absolutely. And it creates havoc in
Mhm.
our system.
Mhm.
And so I truly realized at that moment just how deep that ego narrative runs
Mhm.
in the therapeutic space. And I
Mhm.
realized, no, I am not doing these things. I have wisdom and guidance to share, to impart, to help reinforce. But this is again, goes back to the I'm not a high pressure saleswoman. You have to emotionally, spiritually, and physically be invested in this process because all of those parts show
Matter.
up in care.
Well, yeah, it's so interesting you were saying about the certifications in the paper. And like, I always have to like giggle to myself when I have this conversation in my head because I'm like, if you went to a remote village in China or India or Mexico and you spoke to the indigenous community, would they have certifications on their wall?
No.
Exactly. This
Well,
is my point.
I laugh and I say no. However, I do
Mhm.
know that there are communities where the folk medicine is framed to be a second class citizen, and that the
Right,
people who have money can give birth at the hospital.
right.
So that creates, again, that stature
Hmm.
thing, that precedent
Hmm.
that if you have to give birth with the plant medicine woman,
Oh my God, run me in that direction. That's great.
right?
You can have my bed. I'm good.
Me
I'll pay for
too.
it. Yeah.
I gave birth at home, like,
Uh-huh.
and it was a beautiful experience. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, run me in that direction as well. But like, it has to do with the ego and the social
Hmm.
construct, the narrative that there is around
Yet who do
where you
people
get
go
care.
to when they're desperate?
Those of us that do the quackery.
And then what's the thing that finally puts the period at the end of the sentence?
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
quackery.
The quackery, always.
Because it's there to work with your body,
Mhm.
not against your body. I always say pharmaceuticals are like that drunk person at the bar. Just like it's so good. Insert themselves in conversation. Like you're in an intimate, like conversation with one of your friends, and then you have that person that is one way too close and is too like spitting beer in your face. And you're like, I did not invite you to this conversation. But you're just going to insert yourself. You're an imposition. Like pharmaceuticals to me are that imposition. Like, I'm here and I'm coming in hot. Where like herbs,
Mhm.
teas, extractions, distillations are like, hey, can I stand right here? I'll
Mhm.
make myself quiet. Right. But I just want to be part of the conversation.
I've got your back. I'm here to support you if you need me.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep. Is there not beauty in that? Because I'm like, yo, do you want the beer person or do you want the friend that's like, I'm here for support?
Mhm. Right. Well, and the support person
Hmm.
changes your experience at the
Hmm.
root level
Hmm.
because you feel seen and you
And
feel
safe.
validated and you feel safe and you
Yeah.
feel heard, all
Hmm.
of those things.
It's like salt. Do you know how many people are afraid of salt? I'm sure you hear this too. Like, you want me to eat sodium? Didn't we spend, yes, the last like 2 decades villainizing it? Yeah, we totally did. But your cells run off of sodium potassium pumps. Your stomach acid pulls chloride from sodium chloride. Like, hello, Mother Nature didn't make a mistake. But do you know the example I use to get it to click today? I'm like, when you've gone out and had one too many wobbly pops, that's what they call them in Canada, right? And you wake up the next morning and you're hugging the porcelain throne because you had one too many Olipop. What do we have the beauty of accessing these days? IVs. What are they going to do when you go in for that IV? They're going to hang an isotonic solution and rehydrate you. Do you know what's in that isotonic solution?
Salt.
Salt. But it clicks when you say it like that. It's like, oh,
Well, and I explain it to people with uh cravings around their periods because
yeah.
they're like, "Oh, I had all these cravings." And I'm like, "Okay, so tell me for what?" And that question always like surprises people like, "Oh, not just sweets." It was weird. Usually that's how it starts. It was weird. I craved potato chips and I was like, "You craved salt."
Yes.
I was like, "So that is one of the 5 flavors in TCM, right?"
Yep.
So, like, if you're craving sugary things, it's because your body is looking for sweet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not looking for the candy bar, actually. It's looking
Mm-hmm.
for the sweet potato, but that's okay. Like,
Right.
that tells me that we're looking at spleen, stomach stuff, or salt, we're looking at kidney stuff.
Which PS, I have to shout out Adrienne right here, right now, because yes, I work with her and it's been the best collaboration ever. Zero cravings this cycle. Like my period is knocking on the door. I think we're gonna make it past a 4-day cycle. Yeah, we've been working on building time in, and I have no cravings. The only thing that I have is fatigue. So guys, if you think that steaming's amazing. I'm kind of sad that I don't get to steam longer and more days in a row, but we have maybe one day, but like if you guys don't think that this works, and I was doing a shit ton of things. I know my body really well before I met Adrienne. I needed the support and I needed the tweak.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just having the beauty of another lens to look at the same thing.
Or having someone else hold space because, as practitioners, we hold a lot of space for people all day, every day. And it's a privilege. That's by no mean a complaint, right?
100%.
But that also oftentimes means that we're not always that great at holding it for ourselves, So,
100%.
and
And
that is not coming from a place of ego. P.S. The admission right there is, putting my ego aside and saying, I need help.
I am the exact same way. I know all the things, and yet
Mm-hmm.
in the execution of holding space for others, I often lose myself.
Yes.
And I jokingly tell my acupuncturist that she doubles as my therapist
Right.
because I go in and I'm just like verbal diarrhea with all of the things that are
Mm-hmm.
going on. Like, my dog died, and that grief, and this
Yeah.
frustration with my teen, and this, all of these things. And I'm like, just needle me everywhere. And because I know that it helps her care for me.
Mm-hmm.
But as a practitioner, there aren't many places I feel like I can safely park that either.
I think it's important that you mention this though, because we don't know what we don't know. And
Mhm.
like, we're not here to read your mind or assume. So like, we may be picking up on things, but like, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to go like taking stabs at things until you're like opening the door and saying, come on in. I'm going to share this with you. So we don't know what we don't know. So I'm sure your acupuncturist is like, this is great. I know where to go with all of this and what to do.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
I know that it up levels her ability to care for me, which is why I share all the things. But it's also nice to have a place to park all of that.
Yeah.
I remember at the very beginning of my journey in this direction, I thought I wanted
Mhm.
to be a music therapist. It's funny how it ended up coming full circle in 20 so many years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to disclose that number because that makes me feel old. But as I think about where I started, one of the things that she said to me is therapists need therapists. So if
Yeah.
you're going to do this work, you need a place for your emotional stuff to go.
Mhm.
And the more that I've traveled along this journey, I realized just how important that is, because that authenticity, that ability to unpack your own emotional stuff helps you to hold space for your
Mhm.
clients to be able to release what they need that
Mhm.
isn't serving their journey.
Right.
And
100%.
all of that requires you to get out of that ego space and be a container to hold.
And this isn't to say that ego doesn't exist in these like quote alternative healing modalities. How many practitioners do you meet that have to hold on to everyone and be everything to all their clients? And you're like, yeah, I'm just going to sit back here and watch you burn out. Because eventually you're going to come to learn that that doesn't serve you and it doesn't serve your clients and it doesn't serve their needs. And the superpower is really in collaboration.
It really is. It takes a village.
Hmm.
It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to properly care for the multifaceted, multidimensional being that is you.
And no joke, I mean, I say this respectfully, I don't want to be all of that to one person. Like the role that you take or the role that I take, it's a privilege. And I'm like, that's enough. Let me,
Mhm.
like you need a different kind of like, let's collaborate here. And then when we all come together with one person, holy cow,
Mhm. It's
infinite possibility.
infinite possibilities, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's healing.
That is healing.
And then women, typically women, I have more experience with women. I just don't get as many men saying, hey, I want to run testing and I want to better understand, or I want to spend 4 months with you in an immersion. Like, fine. But like typically women then go, oh, other women are safe.
Yep.
And other women know how to share. And other women know how to hold space.
Because we used
that
to
heals
do
a wound.
this.
Yep. And that heals a wound, a deep-seated wound.
On so many levels.
Cam, did we just like peel apart how our ego kind of just dissolve? Is it egoic to say that? Like, hey guys, my ego totally dropped in practice, and let me just toot my horn about that.
But that's why I love these conversations, because it encourages you to think and reflect on what is my role in the whole model, in the care of my client, in my place in their journey, all of those things. Like, ego doesn't serve us. It's a roadblock to growth, transformation, healing, and true essence of who we are.
Could you end on a more positive note? Like, I don't even think I need to say anything after that. Adrienne just mic dropped.
I love you, and I love conversations
I love you too.
like this because,
we just went all over the forest.
We did, but the thread went all the way through it because it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected from an emotional, spiritual, and physical place. And
honestly, ego perpetuates, as Gabor Mate would say, the myth of normal. Nothing that we do is actually normal.
And I'm going to leave us with that for you to think about, because that is also a fabulous mic drop. So if people were to look to work with you, Taylor, how could they find you?
At Tailored Wellbeing on Instagram is the easiest way to find and explore. Please explore. Please make sure you like the things I put out. Please watch my stories a few times. Guys, I don't hold back on a whole lot, and that's not super comfortable for everyone, and not everybody loves my approach, and that's okay. I'm not supposed to be the cup of tea that's supposed to be in everyone's hand. So Instagram's going to give you a real up close and personal look at the way we, meaning my community, approach this. And obviously we collaborate very intimately with Adrienne. So Instagram, it's the place to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for another incredible conversation, Taylor. And we
will keep doing this with each other. So
I was going to say, we obviously need to do this again.
Yes, would love to.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. Until next time.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist, herbalist, sound healer, and Chinese nutritional therapist Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment with Adrienne for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter to get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like us and follow Moon Essence Me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.